All right, Deuteronomy chapter 6. We didn't actually start Deuteronomy 6 last week because I took a brief break to talk about the story of the Bible, and I broke it into sort of an 8-part mini-series as a way to visualize what the Bible story is about, so we can put Deuteronomy 6 and the whole book of Deuteronomy into the right place in God's story. And the law, Deuteronomy is part of the books of the law. The law was given at Mount Sinai so that God's people would know how they're supposed to live in their particular context while they wait for all of God's promises to come to pass. We talked about Paul in the book of Galatians, where he says the law was a tutor or a schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. It told people how they're supposed to, it gave people a way to relate to God until Jesus came. It gave people a way to relate to each other and live holy lives until Jesus comes. And there's always been a big controversy over what are Christians supposed to think about the law, the Mosaic law, the old covenant, now that Jesus has come. And I'm not going to solve the problem now, but there's a lot of misunderstanding about what the law is supposed to do. It was a way for God's people to live holy lives and relate to him, be in relationship with him until Jesus came. It was a way to express that relationship with Jesus. It didn't make the relationship, it's just the way that a believing life looked like for that time. Jesus has come, and a new and better way to relate to God is here. So here we are in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And the famous part that a lot of people know that Jesus quotes is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 6, where Moses he sums up the entire Old Testament. Jesus sums up the entire Old Testament, and one of the ways he does it is to quote this section, and he says that this section is really the heart of what it means to know and to have a relationship with God. So Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 6. Hear, O Israel, or listen, my people, Israel being God's people. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. Who is over there?
Cheryl.
Oh, okay. Hello, Cheryl.
Need some help, girl?
And that concept, we talked about this before, so I'm just going to mention this and then we'll actually finish chapter 6. What he says there, to love God with everything you have. I don't think there's a point to try and split out what's it mean to love God with all of your heart and then all of your soul and with all of your might, as though those are 3 categories that need to be sort of stitched together. He's just saying love God with everything you have. With everything you have. If you're a believer, your love for God should be a total life commitment that flows, and everything you do in life flows out of that basic principle. Everything you are flows from that. That's what God is expressing to these people as they're going into the promised land to wait for Jesus to come. This is the basis of what he wants them to know. Love me with everything you have. Which makes what the Pharisees did in Jesus's day. It shows you how far away that God's people went from what relationship with him was supposed to be about. And the rest of chapter 6 is him expressing more of that. Does anyone want to talk any more about the point I made about Jesus quoting Deuteronomy and how the law is not a means to get salvation, it's a way to lovingly express lovingly live out your relationship with God? Do I need to go into that more? Do we want to talk about it more? Or should we just move on to the rest of the chapter?
I think go on more. That's what I'm saying.
What did you say, Mark?
Go on more with the rest of the chapter.
I agree.
Okay.
From at least from, well, like verse 24 to chapter 7 or something.
Yeah, maybe we'll actually finish chapter 6 today. I might do the book of Galatians one day in Sunday school when we finish Deuteronomy, so we can, and we'll be able to talk about the law and everything a lot then. But so this is what he says, starting in verse 10 through 15. And he's still talking to them. They're at the banks of the Jordan River, and they're getting ready to go over into the promised land. And he tells them, when the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give you, with great and good cities you did not build, houses full of all good things that you did not fill, in cisterns that you did not dig, in vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant. And when you eat and are full, then take care lest you forget the Lord, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. It is the Lord you shall fear, him you shall serve, and by his name you shall swear. You shall not go after other gods, the gods of the peoples who are around you. For the Lord your God in your midst is a jealous God, lest the anger of the Lord your God be kindled against you, and he destroy you from off the face of the earth. That's really comforting news. But so let's talk about that. I mentioned this a little bit last week, so I think it's important to talk about it again, though. In what way, if you're a Christian today and you're not Jewish, in what way can you say that you're part of the promises made to Abraham and Isaac and to Jacob? Or can you?
The Jew first and the Gentile. Yeah.
How are you, if you're a Christian, how are you part of the promises that God made to Abraham and Isaac and to Jacob?
If you're saved through Jesus, then that's all your lineage too. You become part of that.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, we're adopted.
yes,
We're adopted.
Grafted in.
yeah. And we mentioned this last week. Paul talks about this in Galatians 3, and especially in Romans 11, where Paul uses this analogy of God's people are Israel, and he pictures Israel as this tree, and he says that people who are not Israelites, they're not direct recipients of all of God's promise to Abraham, but they've been grafted in and made part of those promises if they have Abraham's faith. And then Paul in Romans 2:29 talks about the ones, you're not a Jewish person if you just have some outward mark of your faith like circumcision. A true Jewish person is one whose love for God is not written externally, but is written on his heart. No matter who you are, whether you're a Jew or whether you're from Azerbaijan or Seattle, doesn't matter. If you love God and have the faith that Abraham did, where you trust God and his promises and believe him, then you're part of Abraham. You're a son of Abraham in the same way. And I think a really good analogy, and I'll use it in the sermon this morning, is and I used it last week, is the green card thing, where a green card means you're a resident alien and you're legally allowed to be here. You weren't born here, but you're allowed to be here, and eventually you can get US citizenship, and you become a US citizen even though you're not originally from here. That's what everyone who's not a physical descendant of Abraham is a naturalized, who believes in Jesus is a naturalized citizen in that family. You weren't physically descended from Abraham, but you've been assimilated into that family by faith. Any thoughts or anything like that? What does MacArthur say?
No, I'm thinking back on, you were talking about the love of the Lord your God with all your heart. And I think the whole point of the whole study is how do you do that? How does Israel, or how do we say that we really love the Lord with all of our heart, strength, and soul? And looking through the scriptures, I mean, you can go through ceremonies. They have all kinds of rituals and ceremonies you go through. That doesn't really show God that you love him. It's not written on your heart there. But how to be in the world, not part of the world. How not to be controlled by the world. You know, we live in a country where we're surrounded by everything that can drag us away. So I would think that the whole point of this, to try to bring us to that, relationship. We were talking about we're related by faith.
Yeah,
And faith is the beginning part, but then there's the growing part in how to love
Yeah.
God by the time we get through our life anyway. So I don't know if that's all gonna come out in here or not, but that's sort of what I'm thinking along those lines is there just seems like so many churches today have gone off in so many different directions.
Yeah.
And God, they use the name of God, but there's God's not there. So I'm hoping in the process of going through this passage, seeing how God draws his people to himself and to make that type of relationship.
one thing that's really clear that, I mean, one thing that you have to come away with when you look at Deuteronomy is that if you love God, he expects you to do what he says. So how do you, I mean, what's it mean to be in a relationship with God? It means you want to do what he says, not to gain something from him, but just because you love him, you want to do what he says. So every time, all through the law, it's not a list of do's and don'ts. It's more, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments, sort of thing. What's it mean what's a believing life look like? It looks like this. It looks like someone wanting to do what God says because he loves him, because God's done so much for him. So we see at the beginning, if you have the faith of Abraham, you're part of the promises to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, that through them all the nations of the world will be blessed. And he emphasizes that when you go and when you enter the promised land and you take over all these things, the cities that you didn't build, vineyards that you didn't dig, that you didn't cultivate, and all of this stuff, take care lest you forget the Lord who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. How does that happen? What's that mean?
Being brought up out of Israel and out of the hands of slavery, is that what?
Forgetting the
Oh,
Lord.
forgetting. It is, yeah, I don't know how that, the idols of foreign gods, the beliefs of the inhabitants of the land which they just came, so like Egypt, you know, it was full of obviously satanic and
Yeah.
ungodly worship, and the Israelites got caught up in that as well.
Okay.
Stumbling blocks and, yeah.
What does anyone else have any thoughts? What does it mean? How can you forget? I mean, how can, if the Lord has done so many things and visibly shown himself doing so many things, how can you forget? How could they forget him? How do we forget him? That's maybe a better way to make it real.
Thinking about ourselves and our needs and our wants, we automatically put up idols and stuff between us and him.
So is it something then like taking him for granted?
Right, exactly. Until some adversity hits, and then it's, oh, woe is me and help us. And, yeah. Only because bad things are happening. That's the way I see it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this, I forget where, but there's a passage in Judges, I think it's somewhere in Judges 10, where God basically says, you know, I don't want to hear, I'm really tired of hearing you guys come and cry to me when something bad happens. Why don't you go cry to your fake gods that you've been worshiping? Maybe they'll give you a hand. And it's sort of cruel, but I mean, it's something a real person would say. It's like, you know, you've been worshiping other things. Well, maybe they'll help you. Of course, they won't. You can picture God sort of snickering at that point because it's so silly. But I think it's not that they actually will forget that God's there. It's that he just becomes this thing in the background.
Just before they went into all these other countries and started defeating them and then taking on their idols because they didn't destroy the people completely enough.
Yeah, he's about to tell them to not do that. So this is him warning, make sure you don't do this once you get in there. And of course, once they do get in there, of course, they ignore and do it anyway.
That was the way I seen in the Bible, that they picked up idols, is not obeying God's commands and destroying the people. Listen to somebody within their congregation who came up with that golden calf idea. That was someone like one of their leaders came up with that.
Yeah. Yeah,
We just poured all the gold in and out popped this cow, like God's some sort of fool, you know, like he doesn't understand. Oh yeah, I tripped and fell and just fell out of the furnace. The good
Yeah.
one.
yeah, it's this, the sense seems to be that it's not that they don't think God's there or they forget about him or they stop, doing what they're supposed to do, but their real, allegiance shifts from God to something else and
Things.
to anything, to whatever.
I mean, Satan really does have power, believe it or not. And when you're doing things like this or practicing the old, like the Canaanite, God was very, very much against the religious practices and the abominations of the Canaanites, because Satan is the god of this world. Jesus even says so. And you know what? Just like when he tempted Christ, all these kingdoms I can give to you. It's been handed to me, and I can give them to whoever I see fit. And because of that, I think the immediate gratification, and I think that's what is appealing to these people, and even to this day, of money and wealth and status, position, and you can have it right now, immediately. And I think that's why they kept going back, because why wait on God's good time? And because God doesn't work on our time; He works on His time. And that's not selfish human beings that want everything now, and God knows this, it's anyways, that's just an idea.
Yeah, it's so easy to keep going through the motions externally, doing what you're supposed to do, but there being no heart in it because your heart's really turned towards something else. And it can be a million different things. Moses doesn't specify here. He just says that it can happen and it probably will happen. Verse 13, it's the Lord you shall fear, him you shall serve, and by his name you shall swear. Again, talking about this allegiance that needs to be there in your heart. God should be the only one who we really fear and give respect to. He's the one we should serve. It's by his name that we swear, sort of like it's his kingdom that the insignia of his kingdom should be on our uniform, not anything else. And it's easy to still say those things and perhaps not even realize that we've just let our relationship go on autopilot with God, and we're really focused on other things.
The things. John, lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, and pride of life encompasses everything.
Yeah,
We're seeing in America, we have everything available. Even if you're poor, you have a lot available.
yes,
So you
yeah,
can focus on that to the point where, yeah, I believe in God, but I'm so focused on all this other stuff that I don't see God, and I'm walking with him, and I'm thanking him for it and worshiping him for it. And that's where America has gone, and probably the rest of the world as well. But just this massive turning away because we've gotten so much in this world. Unless you're in Afghanistan where your life is in danger every day, and in other countries as well. But the Christians in China and all these other places are being tormented and tortured and put to death for their faith, and they haven't given up their faith. In fact, the church is growing there. But the idea that God brought up adversity oftentimes draws us back to God, and oftentimes God had to bring that upon Israel throughout history to bring them back to that. Hey, I'm still here. Still your strength and your power, and I'm going to give you everything. And as Marshall points out, sometimes we don't want to wait. It's not I want it now. And in our country, we're so used to getting what we want pretty much now, or right away.
yeah,
If we can't get it, well, we can get a credit card. So there's all these things drawing us away. And I'm trying to think of Israel when they're going in and taking over all these things that God said they're already there. All you got to do is get in there and use
right,
it.
yeah,
Like Afghanistan, here's all the military weapons, so you can just pick up and use them. Billions of dollars. So that's pretty exciting when that happens, but you can see how people could be focusing on that versus on the God who made it all possible.
Another thing that's really interesting is that Moses's address, we think of it in individual terms of what am I doing to what's going on in my life to draw me away from God? How am I forgetting God in my life? Which are good questions to ask. But when Moses is saying this, he's saying it to a group. And so when we think about it, it's nice to think about it in individual terms, but we should think about it as a church, as a community, as our church here. Us and the other 40 folks who will be here and at 10:45, 11 o'clock. How are we as a group doing? Because God really rarely condemns one single person. When he condemns Israel, he's generalizing about the group, even though there's probably a lot of good people who don't like what goes on at any stage of time in Israel's history. He just generalizes and looks at everyone and says, the general tenor is this is awful and things are going badly. So what would God think about our faith community? What would God think about our church and how we're doing? Have we as a church forgotten God? And I think it's too vague to talk about the church in America because that encompasses a whole bunch of people. Some of them are weird and some of them are not. I think it's way too vague to talk about the conservative church in America. And I think it's way too vague to talk about Baptist churches. You need to talk about this church. Everyone needs to look at the little or big faith community that they actually attend worship at on Sunday. How are we as a group, if we generalized, how are we doing with stuff like this? It makes you think about yourself, but it also makes you consider that you contribute to a part of something that's bigger, that God looks at as a group, not just you yourself. So when he talks about punishment in verse 15, if we as a congregation, has anyone ever been in a church that's just died? That's had to shut down, or that's just clearly dying? Has anyone ever had that experience? What was it like? I mean, if you ever had that experience, what is the general feel, the general attitude and spirit among the people that are there when a church is clearly dying? Does anyone have any thoughts to share about that?
Church I first went to in Portland, German Baptist. Didn't know anything about Baptist at the time because I was pretty new. But I could tell after I'd been there a while, I knew exciting faith and everything was great. And I was beginning to see things that sort of contradicted the Bible. Now, it's not to say that all the people in that church were, didn't love God.
Yeah.
But you could tell that there was some teaching in there that was kind of bogus. But that group slowly, the church just recently died to the point where another church took over the building. They just walked away. There just wasn't any more people. This little by little, people just drifted away. A lot of them, like myself, we left there and went to another Baptist church in town. It was really growing and involved in evangelism, great teaching from the pulpit. And I didn't see that coming from the pulpit there. It was more of this pastor was almost in tears the whole time. I'm thinking, what's so sad? It was just, and I tried to follow along and everything, but he was sort of separate from the rest of the congregation. And there were people who did follow up, but the young people were more we had people teaching from Western Baptist Seminary.
Oh, yeah.
And teachers, and they were giving us some really good teaching, and we enjoyed being together. We did a lot of things together. We had Bible studies together, but that wasn't going on in the rest of the church. And just little by little, people died off. They got old, they died, and new people just weren't coming in. And most of the people we came in with are now in different churches. I think there's maybe 2 couples that we know that still go. To the new church that took it over.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's a lot of that where the church dies and another church comes and takes the building, and so they die and it goes on.
So on and so forth.
The teaching helps. When people are involved, and we were always doing something. So that part was good. But watching there was like 2 sections of the church, the young people who were growing and the older section that was dying.
When a church is dying, there's this weird, you can't describe it, you can't write it down on a piece of paper in an objective way, but there's this overwhelming sense, there's this overwhelming spirit of defeat and despair and melancholy. And there's this indescribable, it's like there's no life. And I'm not saying that there's not, if if there's 30 people, then it must be dead, and there's 300, it must be alive, because that's not true either. It doesn't matter how many people are there. There's this sense of hopelessness when you can tell that the Holy Spirit, God is done with that congregation for whatever reason. When you look at Jesus's description of the churches in Revelation, and when he rebukes he doesn't rebuke all of them, but the ones he does rebuke for various things, he tells them that if you don't change, I'll take your candlestick away from you, symbolizing the light that they're responsible to hold, the light of Christ that shines across. He says, I'm going to take the candlestick away from you, like snuffing out the light. He's going to take the candle, he's going to go give it to a different congregation, where he's done with that. He's not done with the people, but those people as a group, as that particular church, he's done with them. And they're going to disperse and go to other healthier communities. And it's going to carry on in those ways. There does come times when God is finished with particular congregations. And the main reason why a lot of when they do die, it's because they became focused on other things. It doesn't matter what it is, it could be a million reasons, but there was something else other than the gospel that animated and drove them. And they lost their focus, and they just sort of petered out, like you get into the slow lane on the interstate and you just let your foot off the gas and you just slowly coast and stop, and then a semi hits you. But God does finish with churches. Revelation talks about that. And in verse 15 here in Deuteronomy, we're really tempted to read this and think of salvation. God's not talking about salvation. God's talking about temporary earthly judgment in this life. He's telling the Israelites, you're going to go in, your job is to clear the pagans out from the land and establish a kingdom in waiting, following my laws, so that when Jesus comes, he comes to people who are ready to welcome him and have been expecting him. And if you don't do that, I'm going to destroy you. Meaning he's going to let the enemies come back in. He's going to let them get military victory. Some of you are probably going to die. He's not talking about salvation. He's talking about his blessings will be removed, and that could result in death. Doesn't mean that you're not going to be with the Lord forever. It just means that sometimes God is done with his people on a temporal basis because of their disobedience here and now. And this is a corporate thing as a group. So I think the best way to take passages like this is to realize that when God looks, he doesn't just look at you, he looks at the faith community you're a part of. How is our church doing? Have we forgotten the Lord? Have we forgotten that he has brought us out of the land of slavery and is bringing us to the promised land? Is that the hope that drives us, that excites us, that makes us want to always focus on him and his grace and the message he wants to give to the world? Or are we, as a group, tend to focus on other things? Verses 16 to 19, he goes on in the same sort of subject. You shall not put the Lord your God to the test as you tested him at Massa. That's when they grumbled and complained about how they had no food, and Moses got upset with them. You shall diligently keep the commandments of the Lord your God and his testimonies and statutes which he has commanded you, and you shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may go well with you, that you may go in and take possession of the good land that the Lord swore to give to your fathers, by thrusting out all your enemies from before you, as the Lord has promised.
Somebody heard a sermon one time where God, people kind of reject the idea of thou shalt, but they forget the other part. Because if you do, as it said in here, it'll go up.
Yeah.
If you're, I built you a certain way, I built you as a, say, gasoline V8 engine. If you start putting bad gas in it and don't change the oil, it's not gonna run very well. But if you do all the things that you're supposed to do according to the manufacturer, okay,
Yeah,
then it will run well, it'll have high performance and do great. So I think the biggest part, if we think of ourselves as God's engine, what are we putting into ourselves? To be help, then we begin to wonder, well, how come things aren't going so good? Or how come, I'm not feeling great, or I don't want to go to church today. I want to go to the lake, and I can be just as close to God up on that lake fishing. I've heard that. Yeah, that's why I'm going up there, to be close to God and fish.
yeah,
But the idea is thou shalt. That's the thing that drives a lot of people away. God's telling you, do it my way. And we rebel. No, I don't want to do it my way. We want to be our own God. But even as believers, as we read through this, it seems kind of hard and cold. Do it this way.
well, it's the truth. I mean, if you see, think about this in a corporate way. There's a church in our regional fellowship that's probably going to close, a church that some people in our community know well, that's probably going to close and be taken over by a Hispanic church, another church in a few months. There's 13 people that go to it on a Good Sunday right now. And all the people that go have been Christians for a long time, good Christians. So individually, they're, generically, they're right with the Lord. But as a group, the church has been insular for years. They had a pastor who was there for over 10 years, and he left a year and a half ago because he was clear that the church didn't want to do anything but just focus inward. They were upset when new families would come and kids would run around. It would make the older people upset, and it would discombobulate them, and it's annoying and irritating. And they didn't ever want to change anything. Everything had to stay the same as it was, in 1983. And there was just a nasty spirit. And I'm not saying that if you like doing things the way it used to be, that you're a terrible person. I meant just the whole tenor, the whole feel, the whole everything of that group was, we keep shrinking, but we're never going to do anything different, and we're going to stick and do things this particular way. There was no sense of, it doesn't seem to be like the passage you were mentioning that we just read in Deuteronomy. There was no sense of, things don't seem to be going well with us. We're making no impact on the community. If this church became a smoking crater in the ground, no one in the community would know or care, because no one knows we exist anyway. We're just this self-contained little Tupperware container of a community that just meets here once a week. And there was no sense of, maybe we're doing something wrong, so we need to ask God, what are we doing wrong that makes it so it's not going well with us? There's none of that. And they're down to 13 people. And the pastor left a year ago because he's like, nothing's changing. It's been 10 years, and it's, I need to go to I need to minister in a place where there's life, and there's a spirit is moving and everything. And so he left. And probably there's a large Hispanic church with about 80 people, and they're looking for a building, and they've been holding joint services, and they're probably going to purchase the building and absorb the church such as it is. And it's sad, but I've talked to the interim pastor at length, and the reason why that's happening is because they've lost what their focus should be. When you're irritated because there are kids running around in a church, when there's young people who come and there are kids running around, and that makes people angry, there's something terribly wrong. Something really wrong. But you can have a small church that's full of life and full of the Spirit. It's not about size, it's about attitude and where your heart is, not just your heart, but the heart of the people as a group. And that seems to be what the heart of what Moses is getting at when he says this. It's not just about you, it's about all of y'all as a group. We need to love God. We need to do what he says so it'll go well with us because we love him. Not just you, but we together need to be a community that loves God so it can go well with us.
in the Old Testament, didn't they? You want the older people to teach the younger people.
Yeah.
I mean, older women are to teach the younger women, and so if a church is not, if the older people aren't teaching the younger people, that's all part of the church or the community, is not so much, formally teaching, but just getting to know somebody. That's
Yeah.
part, fellowshipping, getting together, having your church become an extended family. When you have people who disapprove of certain things, with younger people coming in, there's kind of a give and take, I think. Isn't that what it's all about in a family?
Yeah.
There's a give and take, okay? So
Yes.
somebody doesn't like the music, well, we do a little bit of your music and we do a little bit of this music, kind of mix it up, or what's another big headache in the churches that seem to, music is one, or the kids running around. Well, have a time where the kids can run around and a time where they can't.
But it's the heart attitude behind. That was just one example.
Right.
Of, yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's the heart of the church. I
Yeah.
mean, if things need to be discussed, well, then you try to keep open communication. If you're not doing that, your church is not going to last. If you don't welcome the youth, that's what keeps it fresh and new and going, right? I mean, to have
Yeah.
the older believers impart their knowledge to the younger ones, and not just about God, not just about other things, but about what the Lord has done in their lives. And Carl Moss and Janine, they've lived a lot. They've got a lot of knowledge to impart to somebody my age. My mom and dad.
Mhm.
So there's a place for them in a church, I think, as well. But they have to be open to accepting the younger people that come in, not putting up a wall.
Yeah.
Right. I think people need to, well, doesn't matter what I think people should do, but I think we're all called to serve and to be servants. And that's what Jesus was showing his disciples when washing the feet, is that we are called to serve and to serve him. And I think sometimes people want to be in so much control over everyone else. Maybe they don't mean to, but that's how it ends up. It needs to be this way or that way, or I'm going to just let you know all about it, or verbalize my disgust with how things are run here.
Mhm.
We need to just calm down and just let people be, as long as we're not hurting each other, backbiting, causing dissent, people are people, and they're not always going to act and behave the way you would or for yourself. But again, just allow people to be, and it helps them become more comfortable. And like you said, not put up that wall,
Right.
because if you have that going on in a church and that wall goes up, it's no fun, and it's very obvious. It's the elephant in the room,
Right.
and it's like, come on, it's not.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
the question, what's behind stuff like that? I mean, those are just,
There's a spirit.
there's a spirit behind that seems to be opposed to love God with everything you have and love your covenant brothers and sisters as much as you love yourself. So you can go on and on with all sorts of explanations or reasons or well-intentioned ideas, but if you just ask the question, is this about loving? Does this help us love God with everything we have and love one another as covenant brothers and sisters? And the harder is to say yes, because the further you are away from actually being the kind of community that God envisions us being, even back then and now. And the reason why churches can get to the point where this one church is because they seem to have forgotten why they're there. They seem to have forgotten what they're there for. In a sense, they've forgotten the Lord and they're focusing on other things. There's
It
this,
sounds like they're focusing in on themselves and
Yeah.
their comfort.
yeah, they are.
I mean,
So,
Yeah,
Like you said, where do people go? They're here,
Yeah.
well, I'm gonna go to this church, and then I don't like that one, I'm gonna go to this church. So they're always shopping around for the ultimate experience, church. And it's for me, and so I'll feel great versus rather than coming in, what can I do to help make this? We've got a building, we've got a property, we've got a pastor, we've got everything we need. So what am I willing to do to help it grow versus, now I'm gonna go to this other one because I like the singing over there, or I like the youth group, or I like this or that. And sometimes there's good reasons to move on too. When
Yeah.
you have a
Yeah.
evil pastor, or maybe the hierarchy of the church is really not good. But for the most part, I mean, I'm sitting back as an old person here now. I mean, came in young. I did. And our kids were little at the time. Grew up in the church. And I've watched things go up and down. And so we had a choir one time. We had all, I can say, wow, those are the good old days. We should bring the choir back and all that. Well, what's changed? Why is it changing from this to this?
Bye.
Bye. Are you going on your plane?
Yeah, we're heading to San Francisco now,
What?
and then we'll head, and then we'll be back to, then we'll fly to Seattle.
oh, okay, all right, I thought you were
Okay.
visiting San Francisco, but I'll see you later.
Okay, bye.
Stewart. Tenderloin.
All right, so,
San Francisco.
yeah, there's this weird phenomenon going on where Sunday school seems to copy what my sermon's going to be, and I haven't decided if that's my fault or if it actually is just working out that way. But it turned back. But yeah, a lot of this is what I'm going to talk about for the morning service, so maybe it is just me projecting. But the last thing, I guess one of the last things I'll mention to finish this chapter is verses 20 to 25. You know, Moses talks about, listen, your kids are going to want to know about this. If you love God like you're supposed to, I mean, no one's perfect, but I mean, if you do love God and it's the thing that, you know, that you want to have shape your life, then your kids are going to want to know about it. You know, kids will ask questions about it. You'll be bringing them along and having them participate in the faith community, and they'll want to know, what is this all about? And I think I've always thought it was really beautiful the way that Moses tells us to explain the faith to our children. Children have to make the faith their own, but they should know what it's about. And he tells it as a story, which is a sort of a kick that I've been on for the last few weeks, and every teaching session we have is that the Bible's a story. He tells it as a story. Listen to what he says. When your son, in Deuteronomy 6:20 to 25, when your son asks you in time to come, what's the meaning of the testimonies and the statutes and the rules that the Lord our God has commanded you? Why are we doing this? Why do we do all these things? Why do we have these weird things that we do? What do they mean? Then you shall say to your son, we were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt. The Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. The Lord showed signs and wonders great and grievous against Egypt and against Pharaoh and all his household before our eyes. He brought us out from there that he might bring us in and give us the land that he swore to give to our fathers. The Lord commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as we are this day. And it will be righteousness for us if we are careful to do all this commandment before the Lord our God, as he has commanded us to do. They're giving, he says, you need to tell your kids the story of what God has done for us. But it's so easy to make your relationship with God a performance art and to not explain God's grace to kids or to our grandchildren or our nieces or nephews. By Jesus's day, everything had become so twisted. That's why Jesus was so upset at the scribes and the Pharisees. because instead of a faith that they're passing on that has its basis in a story about God's love and grace, it became a religion where you just follow these rules and everything will be fine. Where they had all of these arcane rules to try and make sure that they followed what God's word says. And, you know, you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. So what does it mean not to work? We want to make sure we don't work. And so you have these lists of insanely stupid rules about what you can and can't do on the Sabbath. You can tie one stitch, but you can't tie two because that's work. You know, a woman can do this, but she can't paint her eyelashes because that's work. You can't carry something that weighs this much from one place to another because that's work. But if you have two people carry it, you're only each carrying half the load, that's not work. You know, what does that have to do with this? What's that have to do with loving God because of he rescued you from slavery and the promise of the Messiah? We're sort of, what does that have to do with anything? And so that's why Jesus is so angry when he's confronted all the time. How dare you heal this guy on the Sabbath? He can't carry his mattress and walk away. That's work. He's a sinner. Jesus, like, you're an idiot. I mean, what is wrong with you guys? You've ruined everything. You're missing everything. But that's the faith that they're passing on to their children.
Total control freaks.
This performance art, this legalism, you know, why do we come to church on Sunday? What's this about? It's about making sure you dress the right way, making sure you always listen to the right music, making sure that you never ever look at a woman in your entire life or something bad might happen, making sure of this, making sure of that, and going through a checklist instead of we were slaves to Satan and God loves us so much he sent his son to save us and rescue us from that. And if we believe in him, he adopts us into his family. And now he wants us to live for him, to tell other people so they can be rescued too. You see how far apart those things are? So it's easy to turn religion, faith, your relationship with God into a performance. But Moses here makes sure that he wants them to tell them about God's grace and his love. That's why we do this for God. That's why we come here on this day. That's why we do these things. That's why this is important to us, because of what God did for us. So it's a big difference between faith as a performance versus faith as a total life commitment lived out of love for the God who rescued you. Were you going to say something, Ralph?
Probably.
Oh. Well, see, I saw you had something, so I only took like 60 seconds afterward.
Well, I was just thinking of the part where church is kind of morphed off into special gifts. You know, if his church has a certain gift, they kind of go in that direction. Another church has another gift, or all the gifts. And you look at what Paul, going through 1 Corinthians, dealing with the gifts and saying, pointing out how that wasn't important. You know,
Yes.
and, you know, we get all focused on certain parts of church, as you were saying. Could be music, could be preaching, could be anything. But we get so dissatisfied with it that, well, it's not going to change, so I'm going to go somewhere else. I guess you can do that, but like you said, I don't know if you're ever going to find the one church that has everything you want. Then somebody leaves and, oh, now it's all going downhill. So
Well,
again,
the church is full of sinners, so it's never going to be.
Yeah. Right.
It's never going to be perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just not.
so how do we as a small group I've heard churches start mega churches that started with a Bible study and just grew. And it's possible, not that we need a mega church, but I'm just saying that if we focus on, here again, the laws, as he points out, if you do these things, it'll go well. I mean, I'm kind of putting it simply, but what do we mean well, you know?
Yeah.
So you can define it, break it down. But I think that most people want to go a little bit beyond that. It'll go well. What does that mean? And my attitude is going to change to the point where now I'm just going to focus on the fact that everything's okay and everything's crashing around me, but I'm okay. I mean, there's different ways of looking at it, But I'm trying to think of, we've been here a long time, we've seen people come and go for various reasons. And we know they're still out there, and one day we're all gonna be together in heaven. You know, I just wonder if I can go over to their section of heaven and visit their church. And I can come over to my section. But, and I point that out to him, I says, what part of heaven are you gonna be where I'm not gonna be? You know, you didn't like this particular pastor. Okay, what part of heaven is he gonna be in that you're not gonna be in? And try to bring it back down. Well, why couldn't we just come together and focus on Christ and how this pastor or this deacon or whoever it is can be a better person, a better preacher, a better in their faith. And we all need that. We can't just pick on those people. We have to focus on all of our
Yeah.
issues. And this is gonna simplify.
Right, but also you have people, you have cliques. Even though, you know, we're all Christians, we're not supposed to have, but you're gonna have people who have cliques. You know, it's that way. It seems like it's always that way, you know, so they're I don't know how to explain it, but they're just, they want to be this group. Their focus isn't the whole group, it's just their little clique. And so if somebody from that clique moves on, they all want to, because they're following that person. They're not, their focus is not, I don't think their focus is being, you know, at the church, being fed. You know, does God has them here in this church for a purpose? Their motive is not God. Their motive is to be with this popular person. I mean, that's how I see that. Is you know, your church isn't located in the right neighborhood. You know, I mean, that's not right. But I think there's some truth in that. There's
Absolutely, then all that goes on, and I think it comes down to where do we stand with God? Are we here for our own reasons, or are we here to be servants under the Most High God?
right.
Or are we here to serve ourselves? And, you know,
Yeah,
that's what it comes down to, is it, well,
I think Tyler's teaching is spot
oh,
on.
right,
I think
absolutely.
he's excellent.
I don't like you shiny head.
But I don't think that other people, if that wasn't their, that's not why they were here, maybe, I'm just, you know.
Right.
It was,
No, he also talks about the things that most churches don't talk about because of politically correctness. We don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. Heaven forbid there any kind of adversity be faced. You know, there's going to come a day where it's going to get real ugly according to if you are a Christian or if you believe in the word of Jesus Christ, or, you know,
Well,
this is a very,
I hear what you're saying. My point wasn't, my point is this, is that we, as a church, a way to make Deuteronomy real is to realize that the essence of our relationship with God has always been the same from the beginning until now. The way the outward form it takes has changed. So Deuteronomy exists in a time when the outward form of the relationship looked a whole lot different, but the basic essence of it is you need to love me with everything you have, and you need to always make that be the thing that animates your life and your life as a community together. And there are lots of reasons why churches can lose sight of that and go off into something else and make that the thing, even though they go through all the motions, even with sincerity, and they do everything they're supposed to do, but there's no real warmth or heart about that thing. It just becomes something up on a pedestal with no heart to it, something that sits on your mantelpiece above your fireplace that you don't look at very often. And the way a church can make this real is to make sure that it makes love for God the animating force that drives everything it does. And so we can all think about that in our own lives, and we can think about that as we look at our congregation, no matter whether I'm here or another guy's here or whatever the case is. It needs to be about God and not about something else. And we're done with Deuteronomy chapter 6. So how about that? Now we get it in chapter 7. We can talk about why God wanted them to destroy 7 pagan nations and kill everybody.